Greetings, travelers! Today we're going to take a look back on how exactly Doom in the Tomb changed the Hearthstone meta for the months of October and November. Doom in the Tomb was a Halloween-themed event that started October 3rd and introduced 23 wildcards into the standard meta. This shakeup gave all 9 classes some pretty powerful tools, including some of the most powerful neutral cards from the past. Before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Tempo Storm Hearthstone YouTube channel to keep up to date on your favorite Hearthstone content, whether it be the new Descent of Dragons set, Battlegrounds, or the standard wild metas. Now let's get started. Doom in the Tomb brought back 2 cards for each class and 5 neutral cards from past sets. Some of the cards became meta-defining while others fell flat. Overall, the majority of the new cards created some exciting new decks, helped out decks that were struggling, and created some of the most powerful decks for the meta. Now before we can take a look at everything that defined the meta after Doom in the Tomb, we need to first see how the meta looked before. Before October 3rd, there was a clear dominant deck of the meta, Combo Priest. Combo Priest could deal with almost any early board state, while also being strong against most mid-range and control decks with limited forms of removal. Shortly behind Priest were a couple of different Shaman variants. Quest Shaman was relatively strong, Aggro Shaman had just gained in popularity with the combination of Mogu Fleshshaper and Mutate, and Murloc Shaman was also a fairly strong contender. All of the Shamans were strong even before the introduction of Evolve. As for the other classes, Warriors had some fairly strong archetypes in the form of Highlander, Control, and Tempo. Druid only had a quest variant, Tempo Rogue was one of the only versions of Rogue, and Hunter only really had Highlander decks. When it comes to Mage, Warlock, and Paladin, they really didn't have much going for them in the higher tiers of the meta. Like mentioned before, each class got something that helped it out quite a bit. Shaman was a prime example of gaining one of the most powerful tools that would define the meta for the entirety of its stay, Evolve. An already powerful class, Shaman just needed something to put it over the edge. Desert Hare and Evolve became the powerful 2-card combo Shaman was looking for. Against most decks, 3 4-drops by turn 3 or 4 would be too much to handle. Control decks couldn't answer the minions properly that early, aggressive decks would lose board in an instant, and mid-range decks simply couldn't compete pressure-wise with what Shaman could produce. If you thought that was powerful, let's not forget the fact that sometimes you could throw in a free 8-mana minion or 2 as well with Mogu Fleshshaper being evolved. One type of deck that got a huge boost was Highlander decks. Hunter, Paladin, and Warrior all received a pretty big boost just from Ragnaros being reintroduced. In the past, the Highlander decks had great early and mid-range gameplay, but didn't have that final push to put it over the top. Ragnaros gave all of these decks a nice late-game powerhouse to close out the game. When it comes to the individual decks themselves, Hunter and Paladin got some nice tools for their Highlander decks. Hunter received Call of the Wild, which not only gave them another late-game finisher like Ragnaros, but also gave them another powerful card that would get recasted by Zul'jin. Lastly, Paladin received Mysterious Challenger and Avenge. This paved the way for a new variant of Highlander Paladin, a secret version. These Highlander decks were strong enough to compete with the majority of decks that came out of Doom in the Tomb. One card that introduced a bunch of new decks and made others strong was N'Zoth. It single-handedly created or transformed Death Rattle Rogue, Resurrect Priest, Control Warrior, and Control Shaman. Some of these decks didn't even use N'Zoth to bring back a wide variety of Death Rattle minions, they just used it to resurrect the Kartet Defenders. Kartet Defenders Reborn and Death Rattle made sure that if it were killed off during the game, N'Zoth would resurrect not 1, but 2 copies of it. This powerful combination gave control decks an insane defense from aggressive or mid-range strategies. Both Rogue and Druid only really changed their decks up by 1 or 2 cards, and it made all the difference. Druid was given Kun, the Forgotten King, while Rogue received both Swashbuckler and Shaku, the Collector. Just the introduction of the cards made both classes more consistent. Quest Druid could now pull off insane turns while not only generating pressure in the form of a massive 7/7, but also healing up in the process. Not to mention, the Kun could also be discovered from worthy expeditions, meaning some games you could see upwards to 3 or 4 of this card played. Rogue's addition was a little more subtle. The addition of Swashbuckler just meant that they had more consistent 1-drops. In the past, it was just Pharaoh Cat, which would cause conflict sometimes within the Rogue's hand. Sometimes it wouldn't enable Underbelly Fence if it gave the player a neutral Reborn minion. Ever since Swashbuckler was introduced, that no longer became a problem. Underbelly Fence became more consistent, and the pressure went a long way in Rogue's game plan to get in early damage and clean up the rest of the game with burst damage. Shaku the Collector played a similar role, helping active cards such as Underbelly Fence or Vendetta, while also being a cheaper minion the Rogue could use to fight for board. There were two classes, however, that got the short end of the stick when it came to Doom in the Tomb. Mage and Warlock didn't really receive any help from the wild cards that were reintroduced. Warlock received a decent tool for Zulok in the form of Imp Gang Boss, but it was overshadowed by how much more powerful everything else was. As for Mage, there was some early experimentation with Flamewaker and a version of Tempo Mage that didn't pan out too well. Tempo Mage just didn't really have a strong strategy overall, as the player was forced into this all-in strategy that if they didn't have Flamewaker, they would ultimately lose the game. Lastly, when it came to Priest, it was still a relatively powerful class in the meta. Combo Priest did fall out of its previous Tier 1 slot into Tier 2. This was due to all the other classes receiving some very powerful tools, while Combo Priest really didn't get anything. The one thing Priest did receive was a consistent version of Resurrect Priest. N'Zoth, Sylvanas, Ragnaros, and Lightbomb all made sure that this version of Priest had powerful enough tools to survive in the meta. Doom in the Tomb overall was a huge success and a fun time to experiment with all of the powerful cards reintroduced into the standard meta. The thing to take away from this kind of experiment by Blizzard is that it's really refreshing to see cards from the past interact with standard cards. Although Evolve Shaman may have gotten a little out of hand, we would still love to see old cards come back in the future to stir up the meta. If the next event like this has some sort of balancing when needed, it will help the game feel fun and refreshing in between the expansion releases. We hope you enjoyed this look back on the Doom in the Tomb meta. Comment down below which cards you enjoyed experimenting with the most, and make sure to like and subscribe to the channel to never miss out on all of our Hearthstone content. Thanks for watching.